The mast splits with a sound like bone. Cold spray lashes the deck, then turns warm as ash drifts on an east wind. Someone is screaming beneath the torn sail. Someone has gone into the black water. Above the waves, a winged shape circles, shrieking, and every face on the heaving ship looks up too late. In Frodo's open hand, the ring flashes once like a drowning star. A like and subscription help these tales travel farther, and the comments wait for one small answer as the ship drives on. From what shore, city, or country is this voyage being heard tonight? In Rivendell, months before that cry was torn from the dark, the choice had seemed almost gentle. Snow lay clean upon the pines. Water ran clear in hidden channels beneath the terraces of Elrond's house. Sunlight touched the last homely house as if evil had never crossed the mountains. Yet in the council chamber the air was colder than winter. Men spoke of defeat. Elves spoke of fading. Dwarves spoke of doors long shut and halls long haunted. And upon a table, wrapped and unwrapped with a trembling care that no one mistook for reverence, lay the small gold circle that bent every thought around itself. They named roads and watched each one darken as it was spoken. East over the mountains was watched. South through the gap would pass too near Isengard. Beneath the roots of the mountains lay Moria, and Gandalf, for all his sternness, was silent too long at that name. Boromir of Gondor urged strength, speed, men, walls, the known world of stone and trumpet calls. Aragorn listened and said little, but he knew how many eyes watched the roads of Wilderland, and how many blades would answer to Sauron before any northern company ever saw the Black Land. Then, Goldor of the Havens, who had come from the grey shores where gulls wheeled over the remnants of elder days, spoke what none of the others had spoken. If the roads are netted, he said, then perhaps the road should be no road at all. Let the ring go where the enemy will least expect it, west to Mithlond, then south by sea. The chamber did not stir at first. It recoiled inward. Boromir gave a low, incredulous laugh. By sea? To Mordor? There is no haven beneath the shadow. No haven, said Gondor, but long coasts, many mouths of rivers, and lands in the south where Sauron has many servants, and therefore many places where one more wandering ship may be overlooked. Elrond's face did not change, or many places where one more wandering ship is immediately seen, pursued, and taken. Gandalf lifted his head then, and in his eyes there was a hard light. He had thought of Caradhras. He had thought of Moria. He had felt, as only he in that room fully felt, that some roads were not merely perilous, but timed, waiting. The Balrog beneath Khazad-dûm did not sleep like a stone. Saruman did not watch the plains like a fool. The enemy had laid his expectations heavily upon the eastward ways. Yet the thought is not empty, Gandalf said. The enemy's gaze is stretched toward Minas Tirith, toward Rohan, toward the passes. He expects challenge where pride would naturally send it. He does not look west for humility. Not first. Humility, Boromir said. To hide in a ship while Gondor holds the walls? That struck harder than the words deserved, because it touched the shame each of them already carried. The burden would be borne by stealth, while others bled in the open. Frodo, sitting very still, looked from face to face and understood less of maps than any man in that chamber. But he knew weight. He knew how quickly even kind eyes slid toward the ring and away. He knew the fear in Gandalf's silence. The sea was strange to him. Mordor was stranger. Yet the argument he heard beneath all others was plain enough. Whichever road they chose, someone else would pay for it. Elrond turned to him at last. This choice cannot be made by counsel alone. Frodo's throat tightened. Outside, beyond the carved arches, the wind moved in the cedar boughs. He thought of the Shire, of a round green door, of a kettle warming on a clean hob. He thought of black riders on the road, and of a wound that still ached in cold weather. Then he thought of the sea, which he had never seen. If there is any road left that the enemy does not expect, he said, then that is the road that should be taken. No one in the room called it wise. That was how they knew it might be the only wisdom left. So the fellowship was chosen beneath a gentler sky than the one that would later blaze above black waters. The nine remained the same: Gandalf, Aragorn, Boromir, Legolas, Gimli, and the four hobbits whose smallness made kings uneasy and great powers careless. Yet, from the first step of this road, the world began to tilt away from the tale that had been. They did not turn east from Rivendell. They turned west. In the wild lands of Eriador, winter travelled with them. Frost silvered the empty fields near ruined farmsteads. At Bree, the indoors shut earlier when strangers entered, and lantern light spilled across muddy yards where dogs barked at shadows beyond the hedge. Butterbur worried over ale casks and broken harness, and did not know that the fate of kingdoms slept under his roof for a single short night. In the rooms above, Sam could not sleep for thinking of the sea. Merry pretended cheer. Pippin asked whether fish in the ocean were larger than ponies. Gimli answered that any fish larger than a pony was a thing that ought to be mined out of the world. Legolas smiled. Boromir stood alone by the shutter and looked east, where his city waited without him. Far south, in the Tower of Orthanc, Saruman did what no servant of Sauron had yet done. He guessed, not at once. He watched the reports come like rain dripping through stone. Rangers seen on the west road, a grey pilgrim among them. Halflings hidden, but not well enough hidden. No sign of passage toward the mountains. His mind, sharpened by pride and poisoned by its own cleverness, leaped where others would have plodded. If they were not riding to Gondor, if they were not making for the passes, then they were slipping toward the one road that belonged to no king. He stood by the black window, fingers white on the sill. Beyond the ring of Isengard, the winter light lay pale on the plain. In Meduseld, Grima's whisper was already working. At the fords of Isen, Wulfridas were already gathering in twos and threes. Saruman could have sent all tidings at once to Mordor. He did not. He still believed, with the vanity of a traitor who thinks betrayal can be managed, that the ring ought to come first into his own grasp. So from Orthanc, there went not one message, but several, each shaped with care and malice. Creebane flew west. Men rode in secret through Dunland, and by older, fouler channels, word crept south to Umbar. A ship from the north might be worth more than any merchant fleet, and if upon that ship there travelled a halfling guarded by lords, then blood and flame were cheap prices. The fellowship reached Mithlond under a sky of pearl and iron. For the hobbits, the grey havens were a wound in the world. Everything there seemed both departing and remembering. Tall white birds walked the tide line. Ropes creaked softly against ancient posts, worn smooth by hands now long dust. The air tasted of salt, kelp, rain, and distance, as Sam stood staring at the sea with a face that moved from awe to nausea in a matter of breaths. Pippin said nothing at all. which frightened Merry more than if he had begun talking nonsense. Frodo felt the place like a memory he had never lived. The western horizon seemed too wide for mortal hearts. Círdan received them on the quay. He was older than any grief in the room, and kinder than any warning could soften. "The sea is a strange ally," he told them, as shipwrights loaded water casks and covered bundles of lembas against the damp. "It hides and reveals with the same hand. It carries rumor faster than horses. It magnifies longing. To some, it gives courage. To others, it gives only the desire to flee. Still, if this road is taken, it must be taken swiftly." Boromir looked upon the vessel prepared for them, and his jaw tightened. It was no warship, no proud swan-proud marvel from forgotten songs, but a lean grey craft built for speed and silence. A few mariners of the havens would sail her south as far as they dared. Beyond that, whatever happened would happen under a sky that no elf there pretended to master. "Why not send the ring over sea entirely?" asked Pippin, because no one else would ask, and because he truly wanted to know. The answer came from Elrond, who had ridden west to see them depart. "Because there are no havens in the Blessed Realm for stolen victory," he said. "This doom belongs to Middle-earth." That night, before the cast-off, Aragorn and Boromir stood together where the tide reached black stones. They had not spoken plainly in days. Too much in their blood spoke for them. "My road leads away from my city while it gathers war," Boromir said. "If Gondor falls while I slip along coasts like a thief, I will hear that sound until I die." Aragorn did not offer comfort. He knew too well how false comfort tasted. If the ring goes to Minas Tirith, Gondor falls more surely. Boromir turned on him with sudden heat. Easy for the heir of Isildur to say, when the White Tower is not his burden in the dark. For a moment it seemed their hands might go to sword hilts. Then Boromir laughed once, bitterly at himself. No, that was unjust. Yet there it is. I would rather die in sight of my own walls. "And you may," Aragorn said quietly, "only not as you imagined." When dawn came, the gulls cried, and the grey ship left the havens. The first days were almost merciful. The coast of Lindon slid away in rain-washed distances. The sea breathed under them, long and cold, not yet angry. The elf mariner at the tiller taught the hobbits where to brace their feet, and when not to look over the side. Sam failed magnificently at both, and spent one whole day pale as candle grease, clutching a bucket and muttering that no vegetable grown in the Shire had ever behaved so treacherously as the deck beneath him. That drew a laugh even from Gimli. But the sea did what roads do more slowly. It narrowed choices. There was nowhere to hide from one another. Frodo could not slip away among trees. Boromir could not storm off down another path. Gandalf slept little. At night, Aragorn walked the deck and watched the dark shoreline pass in fragments. Ruined watchtowers, long beaches of shingle, estuaries silver in moonlight. Legolas listened to the surf and heard, for the first time in his life, a call older than the songs of leaves. It troubled him without his knowing why. Far inland, winter deepened over Rohan. In Meduseld, the torches smoked against carved beams. King Theoden sat slumped beneath his own banners, hands twitching upon the carved arms of his chair, while Grima bent and whispered. Of caution, weakness, surrender dressed as prudence. No grey rider came at evening. No bright voice broke the spell. Yoma argued until his words turned to accusation, and accusation turned to chains. Outside, the wind combed the burial mounds, and the horses stamped in their stalls as if they smelled wolves before men did. At the fords of Isen, Theodred rode against the first testing blows from Isengard, and met not a probing raid, but a plan already hardened. Saruman, free from the later ruin that Merry and Pippin would never bring upon him, had longer to forge iron, fell trees, breed orcs, and choose his hour, rain mixed with blood in the reeds. Men of the Westfold died, hearing no horn from Helm's Deep, only the river and the screaming of horses. The Fellowship knew none of this yet. They knew only the weather turning. By the time they passed the long coasts north of the Isen, the sky had lowered. Wind came sharp and wet from the southwest. The mariners spoke more often in Elvish, brief, hard exchanges not meant to comfort. Gandalf stood at the prow with one hand on the mast and watched blackbirds pace them above the surfline. When the storm struck, it came without grandeur. It came like spite. The sea heaved green-black beneath them. Rain slashed sideways. The sails snapped so hard that Sam thought the world itself had torn. The shore loomed too close through sheets of water, and in the lightning, Aragorn saw fire points moving among the dunes. Not lightning, torches. Men were running the strand, and others loosed arrows from behind driftwood palisades, set there not for fishing, but for waiting. Down, Boromir roared, and an arrow punched through the wet canvas where Pippin's head had been a heartbeat before. The attack from shore lasted only minutes. It felt longer than the history of kingdoms. Legolas shot by flash alone, and each shot ended in a cry muffled by storm. Gimli hacked at a hooked line cast from the breakers. One of Círdan's mariners took an arrow under the ribs and fell without sound, his blood running pink in the rain. Gandalf raised his staff, and sudden white fire leaped along the ship's side, so that men in the surf stumbled back, shrieking, blinded. Then the sea itself chose for them. A wave struck broadside, monstrous and cold, and the ship lurched beyond the shoals and out into deeper dark. The archers vanished behind rain. When dawn broke, the dead mariner was stitched in sailcloth. The Fellowship watched his body slide into grey water, while gulls circled once and wheeled away. No one called the victory a victory. They had survived. That was all. Yet as the little ship went south again, each of them understood something that the councils of Rivendell had only named abstractly. They were expected now. The secret had already begun to rot. In Minas Tirith, Denethor, son of Ecthelion, stood late beneath the hidden chamber and looked into the stone he had no right to trust. Sometimes it yielded truth. More often, it yielded truth sharpened into despair. He saw black sails gathering at southern quays. He saw smoke over Pelargir long before the smoke truly rose. He did not see his son clearly. That made all else worse. If Boromir lived, he was absent. If he died, there had been no word. Denethor's anger, like all deep angers, wrapped fear inside itself until even he could not separate them. Faramir, in Ithilien, smelled war before he saw it. Southrons moved on the roads in greater numbers. Haradrim's standards flickered through the trees beyond the river paths. Rumour came from fishermen and deserters alike. Umbar was stirring early. On the grey ship, Boromir felt that pull as if it were a hand at his chest. They rounded the coasts of Belfalas under cloudless cold, and the white towers of Dol Amroth showed far off across the bright water like a memory of safety. Men there, looking seaward from the battlements, saw only a small grey vessel too distant to name. Yet for Boromir, the sight of those banners was torment. He found Gandalf alone after sunset, when the sea glowed darkly and the west still held a pale seam of light. "We could provision there," Boromir said, quietly. "A word to Imrahil, one message to Minas Tirith." "One message becomes a rider," Gandalf answered. "A rider becomes a search becomes a tale. Before your letter reaches your father, its shadow reaches the enemy." Boromir stepped closer. Salt had dried white upon his cloak. "My father is not a shadow. My people are not pieces on a board to be sacrificed because secrecy is convenient to wiser men." Gandalf turned then, and the old weariness in him was sharper than anger. "Do not speak to me of sacrifice as if I have asked it cheaply. I know very well what we are demanding of Gondor. I know what we are demanding of all free lands. But if the ring enters your city, it will not save it. It will crown its ruin." Boromir's voice dropped. "Then why does every road to victory require Gondor to bleed first? Because Gondor stood closest. Because evil always reaches the nearest door before the farthest. Because there was no justice in war, only necessity, and the hope that necessity had not already come too late." Gandalf could have said any of these. He said only, "Because there is no other wall strong enough to buy us this time." Boromir looked away toward the unseen east. He said nothing more, but the silence that followed was not surrender. It was accumulation. 3 nights later, they saw the first black sail. It appeared at dawn off the larboard quarter, small against the glittering water, then another farther south, then a third. The elf at the tiller cursed softly in a tongue Sam did not know. By noon, there were 5. They kept their distance, testing angles, patient as hunting dogs. Their hulls were low and swift. Their sails were dark, not by weather, but by dye. "Corsairs," Aragorn said. No one needed the word explained. The little grey ship fled south through the afternoon. Wind favoured neither side. The black sails widened, narrowed, vanished in haze, returned. As evening fell, Gandalf ordered every lamp doused. The sea turned to iron. Frodo sat wrapped in a cloak near the mast and felt the ring like a living heat against his breast. He did not need to see the enemy to know they were there. The air itself had become watchful. The attack came at moonrise. Grapnels thudded into wood. A hull slammed alongside with a shiver that nearly threw Merry into the sea. Men came over the rails in lacquered leather and curved helms, shouting in tongues from farther south than any of the hobbits had imagined. One of them wore a black breastplate chased with silver Caesarpence, and his face behind the helm was pale and proud, not unlike a lord of Gondor twisted through a mirror. Fire arrows hissed past. Tar caught. Smoke rolled along the deck, oily and sweet. Then battle destroyed all language, but impact. Boromir met the first boarder's head-on, shield ringing, sword red at the edge. Gimli vanished below a forest of legs and emerged by knee height, leaving men screaming and falling. Legolas on the stern rail shot so quickly that his bowstring became one hard note in the din. Merry dragged Pippin clear of a cutlass that buried itself in the mast. As Aragorn fought like a man trying to hold together, not a ship, but a future already splitting under him. Frodo crouched under an overturned cask, the ring cold now, then hot, then cold again. He saw through gaps of flame one moment that no one else fully saw. Boromir, turning from a fallen corsair captain, his gaze fastening not on the enemy, but on the chain at Frodo's throat. It lasted less than a breath. Then another raider lunged, and Boromir killed him with a cry so raw it might have been self-disgust. Gandalf chose that moment. He struck the mast with his staff, and fire ran upward in a straight white column. Not red flame, not smoke-thick blaze, but something cleaner and more terrible. The nearest corsair galley caught like dry paper. Men threw themselves into the sea. The black captain staggered back across his own rail as burning pitch rained around him. The grey ship tore free. When dawn came, they had won nothing except open water and a captured boat hook. Their own vessel was grievously hurt. The mainmast was cracked half through. 2 mariners lay dead. Gondor himself, who had stood by the tiller through the fire, had taken a blade under the arm. He lived long enough to grip Gandalf's sleeve and whisper, "They knew," before blood filled his mouth, and the sea took him too. Searching the gear torn from one of the corsair dead, Aragorn found a sealed token wrapped in oilskin. Saruman's mark was pressed into the wax. No one spoke while Gandalf broke it. The message within was brief. A northern craft, great prize, the halfling living, a deliver to no master but Orthanc. Boromir read it over Gandalf's shoulder and went cold. Even he had not imagined so much arrogance. Saruman did not serve Sauron cleanly. He hunted against him and with him at once, a spider trying to rob a larger spider on the same web. "The sea road is lost," Aragorn said. "No," Gandalf answered, though his face had hardened into something grim and almost joyless. "Not lost, changed." By that afternoon, the grey sail was lowered and burned. A black sail went up in its place. The Fellowship turned their damaged ship into a lie and kept south under the enemy's own colours. It worked for a time. Fishing boats fled at the sight of them. Shore beacons flashed and went silent. In the harbours of Near Harad, men glanced up from their nets or spice bundles and muttered that more raiders were running early this year. Ordinary life bent around the war without stopping it. Children played in alleys that smelled of fish oil and cumin. Women lifted laundry from rooftops when armed riders passed below. At night, drums carried from inland camps where levies gathered for a king they had never seen, and a dark power they served because taxes, threats, and old conquest had narrowed every other choice. From one such harbour, hidden among coasting craft and mangrove shadows, the Fellowship slipped ashore at the mouth of the Harnen. The change from sea to southern land struck like opening an oven. Heat rose from mudbanks. Insects whined in clouds. The stars looked wrong to the hobbits, lower and more crowded. Reeds clattered in a warm wind. Somewhere upriver, a beast coughed like a broken bellows. The plan, mad from the first, became madder there. They would not strike north through Gondor, where every road would now be watched. They would go east through the edges of Near Harad, avoiding armies, skirting caravan routes, then cut toward the inland sea of Nurnen and enter Mordor from the south, where slave roads and tribute roads ran under lesser guard than the Black Gate. Lesser guard. That phrase would poison them later. Their first guide came to them by chance and hunger. She was a Harad woman with a sun-browned face, one arm scarred by old burns, and a boy of perhaps 12 hidden behind her robe. She had seen the Fellowship burying their black sail in the reeds and had drawn a knife, not out of courage, but because she expected death anyway. Aragorn spoke enough of her trade tongue to parley. Gandalf told her plainly that they were enemies of the Dark Lord, not allies of Umbar. She looked at them as one looks at rain in a drought. Wanting to believe, certain belief is dangerous. Her husband had been taken north with a levy and had not returned. Her eldest daughter worked the salt pans under overseers from Mordor. for water, gold she did not trust, and safe passage for her son to the coast after, she would lead them by old caravan tracks. What is an enemy in such places? A banner, a language, a tax collector, a hungry man with armor. Frodo watched her bind Sam's blistered feet one evening with strips of clean cloth and thought how strange it was that the road to destroying the greatest evil in the world now depended upon the pity of a woman Gondor would have called foe. Behind them, the world broke. Rohan did not hold as it had held. With Eomer chained and Gandalf far away, and with no strange halflings to rouse the Ents of Fangorn, and no desperate ride of the three hunters to gather chance into Providence, Saruman's war fell heavier and earlier. Helm's Deep became not a legend of deliverance, but a night of slaughter lit by blasting fire. Men huddled with children under dripping stone while the culvert burst and iron-footed orcs poured through. The horn of Helm sounded and was drowned. Those who escaped rode east across fields already trampled into mud, carrying no kingly confidence, only stories of burning. Theoden, hauled half-willing from ruin too late, died not in a charge beneath open sky, but in a dim hall choked with smoke from his own rafters. Grima vanished into the confusion like a rat. The mark did not cease, but it shattered into pockets of riders, lordless and furious, roaming a land stripped of certainty. In Fangorn Forest, the trees remained silent. In Gondor, the cost was just as cruel, only slower. Corsairs, no longer checked by any kingly return from the paths of the dead, ravaged the southern fiefs. Pelargir burned in places, Belfalis blackened. Faramir fought in Ithilien and along the river crossings, snatching moments and losing miles. Denethor saw too much smoke and too little hope. Every message that failed to mention Boromir deepened the fissure in his mind. The Fellowship learned these things in fragments from refugees, deserters, and campfire rumors. Each rumor struck Boromir like a blade. He lasted longer than weaker men would have. That was the cruelty of it. Temptation in him did not wear the face of greed. It wore the face of white walls under siege, as of men he knew by name, standing where he should have stood. The breaking came under date palms on the edge of the Nurnen road. They had been 3 days without good rest. Dust coated every tongue. Frodo stumbled often. Gollum had not yet entered their tale, and so there was no creeping witness save the stars. The Harad woman had gone ahead to scout a well. Sam was foraging with Merry and Pippin. For one brief interval, Frodo and Boromir stood apart among ragged shade, while the others argued over direction. Boromir spoke softly, which made it worse. "Give it to me." Frodo looked up, already knowing. "Not forever," Boromir said. "Not as a tyrant, as a captain, as a man who can still use strength where strength is needed. Minas Tirith still stands. With this, it would do more than stand." The ring lay hidden, yet its shape seemed printed through cloth and skin alike. Frodo felt suddenly very small, very tired. "That is what it wants you to say. And what if it wants because it knows it is true?" Boromir's voice sharpened, then cracked. "Do you think I do not know danger? Do you think I cannot feel it? But I hear the news, Frodo. I hear what our secrecy has brought. Rohan burns. Gondor is besieged from river and sea. How many must die to keep your path pure?" "My path," Frodo said, and now fear turned to anger. "I did not choose war. No, but you carry the thing that may end it." He reached not with a snarl, but with desperate gentleness, as one might take a burden from a child. That nearly undid Frodo more than violence would have. Frodo stepped back, put on the ring without thought, and vanished. Boromir staggered as if struck. The palms hissed overhead. He fell to one knee in the dust, both hands over his face. When Aragorn found him moments later, Boromir did not lie. There was no excuse left in him. "I tried to take it," he said. "For Gondor, for myself. I cannot divide those cleanly anymore." Aragorn looked toward the empty air where Frodo had fled and felt a weariness old as his line. "Neither can I," he said, "always." That honesty saved Boromir from some lesser despair. Not the guilt, never the guilt, but the loneliness of it. Frodo returned at dusk because he had nowhere else to return to. He did not forgive Boromir with words. He simply sat beside the fire while Sam poured water carefully between them, as if performing a rite. Boromir accepted that mercy with lowered head, and from then on guarded Frodo more fiercely than before, as though repentance could be made into armor. Near Núinen, they found Gollum. He was in an overseer's cage by a slave road, half-starved, filthy even by his own standards, and muttering to himself in a voice that sounded like wet leaves rubbed together. The cages held thieves, runaways, and examples. Men passed them without looking. Orcs laughed and spat. The Harad guide recoiled when she saw him and crossed herself with a local sign against hungry spirits. But Frodo knew him at once from Gandalf's old descriptions made flesh at last. The bent shape, the long fingers, the eyes bright with ancient need. Gollum knew Frodo too. Recognition flared through him like pain. "Baggins," he whispered, and the word was both adoration and hatred. How had he come there? By roads no one else would willingly have taken. Tortured once in Mordor, turned loose, drawn ever after by the ring and the name of the Shire, he had wandered through dead marshes, border ditches, smugglers' caves, and slave lines, following rumors of halflings aboard black ships. Obsession gave him a map finer than reason. Gandalf wanted him left. Aragorn wanted him gagged. Sam wanted him buried under the nearest dune. Frodo wanted him spared. And because Gollum had once slunk in bondage through parts of Mordor where no free creature had walked and returned, he became, against all wisdom, the guide for the last stage. By then, the southern approach had revealed its true nature. Sauron had not left it thinly guarded. He had fed armies from it for years. Núinen spread beneath a haze of heat and smoke, its inland waters dull red at sunset, ringed by immense fields where slaves bent under whips to feed the war machine of Arda. Granaries rose beside barracks. Causeways crawled with carts. Watchfires burned on low hills. The road they had hoped would be neglected was alive with labor, cruelty, and supply. Their hidden path had become a funnel into the very engine room of the Dark Lord. That was the moment when their quest could have ended, not with heroics, but with simple impossibility. Gandalf looked out over the slave fields and made the choice that would cost them most. Frodo and Sam would go on with Gollum through ash gullies and ore tracks toward Orodruin. The others would remain in Nirn and force Sauron to look south with all the noise and ruin they could create. Not a battle to win, a distraction vast enough to mimic an invasion. "Can 8 make such noise?" Pippin asked, trying to sound brave and not quite managing it. Gandalf turned to the endless ranks of beaten workers and said, "Not 8." Night after night in those fields, quiet words became sparks. Chains were cut, water stores were poisoned, storehouses were marked. Men and women from Harad, Khand, and farther east learned that the strangers in their midst were striking not to conquer, but to break the whip. Some did not believe it until blood proved it. Some joined at once because despair had made them reckless. Boromir moved among them like a penitent king with no crown, teaching spearwork to farmhands, taking abuse from those who hated all northerners, and accepting it because history had earned some of it. Aragorn spoke to chieftains in broken dialects. Legolas climbed granary roofs under moonlight and cut signal lines. Gimli organized breaches in stone dikes with the practical focus of a craftsman. Merry and Pippin carried messages through drainage tunnels where grown men could not fit. The Harad woman found her daughter in the salt gangs, and for 1 hour, between fear and dawn, there was a reunion too small for songs and greater than many battles. Then the fires began. They rolled across Nirn in waves. Grain stores burst. Slave pens came down. Whips changed hands. Orc overseers were dragged into the same mud where they had kicked others. The great horn of Boromir sounded over the fields, and in that alien land beneath a redder sky than Gondor's, the note was so fierce and strange that thousands lifted their heads at once. It was enough. Sauron looked south. Winged shapes tore from the dark above the plain. Companies wheeled off the northern roads. The eye, which had been straining toward Gondor and the Westering War, bent sharply toward the rebellion at its granary gates. That bought Frodo hours. Only hours. The price was paid immediately. A troll from the labor pits crashed through a burning palisade, chains still swinging from one wrist. Merry, trying to drag a child clear of its path, looked too small even to be seen by it. The club came down once. Pippin was still screaming his name when Boromir reached them. There was no speech for that. No brave last line. Merry died in dust that smelled of hot grain and blood under foreign stars he had never wished to see. Pippin knelt beside him with ash on his face and childhood gone forever. Boromir stood over them and lifted his horn again. The Nazgul descended. One of their fell beasts swept low over the flooded paddies, and Legolas, standing waist deep in filthy water, drew and loosed in a movement so smooth it seemed inevitable only after it had happened. The arrow vanished into the beast's eye. It toppled screaming into the fields, crushing men and orcs alike. A cheer went up from slaves who had never heard the name of Mirkwood. Another Nazgul answered with a darting strike that took Legolas across the side with talons like hooks. He did not fall then. He fought on, pale and silent, his blood running black in moonlight. But the wound opened deeper with every breath. Boromir met the next assault at a narrow causeway between irrigation canals. Orcs pressed from both sides. Southron cavalry crashed in behind them. Pippin, wild with grief, and would have died there in the first rush had Boromir not seized him by the collar and flung him behind his shield. Then Boromir planted his feet and became the wall he had always believed himself born to be. He sounded the horn until it split. Arrows found him. 1, then 2, then more. He fought on. Sword broke. He took up an axe from the mud. Men rallied to him who did not know his name, only that this great northern warrior was standing where death was thickest and refusing to step back. When at last Aragorn reached him, the causeway was choked with bodies, and Boromir was on his knees, one hand still on Pippin's shoulder, as if even dying he feared the hobbit might wander into danger. "Minas Tirith," Boromir said through blood. "Tell them." I did not turn away. Aragorn bent close. Around them, Nirn burned, and the Nazgul screamed overhead. You did not. Boromir died, not in sight of the White Tower, but facing east. Far beyond that battle, Frodo and Sam climbed through the last desolation with Gollum slinking before them. Here, Mordor ceased to be a realm and became a wound. Ash drifted knee-deep in hollows. Heat breathed from cracks in the ground. The sky glowed bruised at all hours, and Orodruin towered ahead, not distant enough ever to diminish, not near enough ever to arrive. There were no trees, no birds, no softening sounds. Only the crunch of clinker underfoot and, at times far below, the drum of armies diverted south by a rebellion they believed more urgent than one hobbit in the waste. Could the sea have hidden the ring from the eye? For a while. Only for a while. In the end, the sea had done something subtler and more terrible. It had shifted the battlefield, a scattered hope across wider horizons, delayed one doom and hastened another. It had preserved Gandalf and doomed Rohan. It had spared Moria and delivered Nurn to revolt. It had not denied fate. It had only changed where fate collected its debt. At the Samath Naur, there was no one left to deceive but themselves. Gollum, who had guided and cringed and whined, struck when the firelight shone gold through Frodo's fingers. Sam hurled himself forward. They rolled together on the stone. Frodo staggered to the brink and turned. In his face there was no peace, no release, only the terrible clarity of a will finally broken at the last possible moment. "I will not do this," he said. The ring was on his hand. Sam knew then what pity had cost and what it would now repay. He lunged too late. Gollum sprang with a shriek of joy so pure it was almost innocent. Her teeth flashed. Frodo cried out. One finger, and the ring with it, vanished in blood. Gollum danced on the edge with his treasure, laughing into the fire. Then stone gave way under his own frenzy, and he fell. The world answered at once. Far away in Nirn, the Nazgul wheeled and broke like smoke. Slaves and soldiers alike looked upward as the will above them snapped. Towers shook. Barad-dûr groaned in its foundations. The plain convulsed. Aragorn felt the pressure in his mind release so suddenly that he nearly dropped to the ground. Gandalf, standing amid flame and floodwater, closed his eyes for one brief instant in something like grief before relief could reach him. Mount Doom erupted. Eagles came because Gandalf called, and because some rescues are granted only after all lesser hopes are spent. Frodo and Sam, half blind with heat and ash, were lifted from a ledge as the mountain broke behind them. Frodo cradled his maimed hand and said nothing. Sam wept from exhaustion, gratitude, and the delayed force of every fear he had not had time to feel. For a little while after, there was relief so immense it felt almost clean. The enemy was gone. His armies, robbed of command, scattered or cowered. Chains in Nirn lay open. In Gondor, the assault faltered. At the ruined edges of Rohan, raiders lost heart. The sky over Mordor, though still stained, began at last to move like weather again, and not like a lid. Then the full shape of victory appeared, and it was not clean at all. Rohan was not saved in time to remain what it had been. Too many barrows were fresh. Too many halls were roofless. Gondor endured, but as a city ringed with smoke and mourning. Denethor died before dawn of hope could reach him, a steward consumed by despair in a world he could no longer read. Faramir survived against expectation and inherited not triumph, but wreckage. The southern fiefs counted their dead by harbour and by farmhouse. In Nirn, freedom did not instantly become peace. Fields had burned. Overseers were dead. Those who had been enslaved were now hungry, armed, and uncertain who among them should lead. Aragorn did come at last to Minas Tirith, but not upon a captured corsair fleet with banners streaming and prophecy at his back. He came road-worn from the south with a handful of survivors, bearing Boromir's broken horn and a face older than the months behind him. The crown, when it found him, found a man less radiant than in the songs, and perhaps more fit for a ruined age because of it. His kingship began with burial details, grain counts, seawall repairs, and long rides to reassure villages that had seen too many lords pass by without protection. Pippin carried Merry's memory like a blade under the ribs. He would laugh again in time, but never carelessly. Merry was buried not in the Shire earth he loved, but beneath a cairn near Nurnen, where former slaves planted hardy grass around the stones and learned his name by repeating it badly but sincerely. Some of them told their children that a small warrior from the Green North had died pulling another child from a monster's path. In that land, that was enough to make him kin. Boromir's name returned to Gondor cleansed by truth and complicated by absence. He had failed. He had repented. He had died defending a road no one in Minas Tirith had known existed. Faramir kept the splintered horn and sometimes held it as if by weight alone he could understand the last choices of his brother. Legolas lived, though the wound from the Nazgul beast never wholly left him. The sea had already entered him on that first voyage south. After the war, he looked west more often. Gimli noticed and said nothing until years later, when he would choose an impossible voyage of his own for friendship's sake. Gandalf remained longer in Middle-earth than he had expected when they cast off from Mithlond. There was too much to mend and too much to grieve. He went first not to kings, but to the broken places, to the camps of the displaced in Rohan, to the blackened quays of Pelagir, to the freed fields of Nirn, where men who had been enemies a season before now bartered grain under the same patched awnings. He had chosen the sea road and seen the price of choosing. Wisdom did not spare him that knowledge. It only denied him the comfort of ignorance. And the Shire, so far away that once it had seemed untouched by all of this, did not remain untouched. Saruman, stripped of greatness and swollen with spite, fled north while kingdoms rebuilt. With Rohan crippled and the roads thinly watched, his malice reached the little land harder and sooner. Smoke rose from cut trees. Mills clattered where gardens had been. The returning hobbits found not innocence preserved, but innocence violated, and so even their final homecoming carried the taste of another battle. Still, gardens grew again. Sam saw to that. He planted where ash had settled and green answered. Frodo bore the longest wound. The sea had begun his last road, and in the end, the sea called him back. When he stood once more at the Grey Havens beside the same western water from which this altered doom had launched, he looked neither defeated nor healed. He looked finished in one world and already half gone to another. Sam held him, then let him go, because love that clings can become another kind of ring. So what had changed? Everything that mattered, and less than anyone hoped. The ring was destroyed. That remained the fixed point around which all other fates twisted. But the roads chosen toward that fire shaped who lived to see the dawn, which realms stood whole enough to greet it, and what songs would later be sung in halls rebuilt from scorch and salt. The sea did not offer a cleaner victory. it offered a stranger one. A victory spread across coasts and slave fields, bought by storms instead of snowdrifts, by black sails instead of black gates, by the fall of a man of Gondor under southern stars, and the silence of a forest never roused in time. Long afterward, along the shores of Belfalas, old fishermen sometimes found charred fragments of a small northern hull worked into the kelp after storms. They said the wood was too weathered to sink and too burned to belong to any ordinary wreck. And on certain evenings, when the sunset turned the water the colour of old blood, the black splinters knocked softly against the stones, like bones that still remembered the sea.